All right, well, we're back in the shop today, and today we are diving into my vintage old school AE86 build. So I've actually had this car for about a year now. I got it at the end of a long line of trades. I basically started with a Honda Grom that I bought for $3 grand. It was a modified kind of race bike. It for a while, ended up trading it for a Seat Time 350Z, a basic 350Z setup. Actually, this car right here. Had a great time with that car, drove it a lot, probably did 1,000+ laps in that thing with my friends Adam and Matt. We all had very similar cars, and we kind of outgrew them, started driving other stuff more. I got this car done, and I ended up trading the Z for an unfinished LS FCRX7 project. I got that car together, got it working, got it sorted out mechanically, and just found myself not really using it as much as I thought I would. So when a trade deal popped up to trade it for an S13 hatch with an SR, a true right-hand drive 180SX, I jumped on it. I decided to make the trade, and the car ended up being a little bit more haggard than I expected. There was just a lot of things that needed to be redone or gone through on the car. And I just didn't really have the passion to do it because I already had this car, which is basically a better version of that. You know, it's got a K-Series, a T56, and I'd already put a lot of time into this car. I didn't really care to put that time into another car that was basically the same thing. So then I traded it for this. So I got this car from a really cool guy named Joe. We worked out a trade deal, and I've had the car here and on the road for a while now, but it's got some pretty big issues that have prevented me from actually driving it and enjoying it much. And when I got the car, I wasn't quite sure exactly what direction to go with it, but I finally decided on a build plan, started collecting parts, and we finally have all the parts we need to build this thing and the time we need to do it, and we're finally gonna get into it. So quick rundown on the car as it sits. So it's got all of the suspension stuff. It's got arms and coilovers and all the main things that you see most people do to these things to drift them. It's got some custom built, period correct, old school 3-piece wheels with big lips. We've actually got 4 pairs of spares. They're not as aggressive as these, but they are also period correct wheels. It's got a old school bride seat in it. I've got a 360 Nardi that I put in here. Typical drift button, basic stuff in the interior. It's a GTS Coupe, so it's got the same red two-tone interior as the one of these I had a very, very long time ago. That was probably my biggest trade regret. I used to trade a lot when I was younger because I couldn't afford to actually build cars. And I traded that car for a bike that I sold for $3 grand. So that one still stings to this day, and I'm hoping to get some redemption by building this thing outright. Past that, it's pretty well stock. It's got a 4AGE 16-valve twin cam in it. As you can see, it is a very, very small engine, and it's pretty well all stock. It's got an upgraded radiator. It's got a header on it and a exhaust. But other than that, engine-wise, drivetrain-wise, it's pretty much bone stock. And at the moment, it smokes like a chimney. This thing, it's a bug killer for sure. Now, I compression tested it. It has great compression. I'm thinking it's more along the lines of valve seals. It's also got a very whiny diff, which is a pretty common problem with these things. And the typical car guy way, if we're gonna fix it, we might as well upgrade it. So let me show you what we've got to go on this car and what the goal is building it. So this is kind of the first batch of parts that we have to go on this thing. So we've got some big cams, valve springs, we've got new valve seals, important. We've got a full diff rebuild kit, wheel bearings, all that stuff, basic maintenance stuff. We've got a Tomei 1.5 way diff to go in it. If we're taking the diff apart, I want to switch it to an LSD. It's currently a welded. We've got Tomei cam gears so we can properly degree in our cams. And we have an MSD ignition box, an ignition coil, because we are taking this thing from fuel injected to carbureted. I was dead set on running this thing carbureted. So we have a bike carb kit, we've got a Piper Cross air filter, we've got all the stuff to make that work. The original plan was to do dual side drive Webers, but I couldn't get them at the time, so I settled for the bike carbs. We'll see how we like it. But one of the reasons we're converting this car to carbureted is the goal for this build isn't for it to be some super good drift car or powerful or some great toge car. We're gonna do all those things with it. We're gonna drift it. We're gonna take it to the dragon. We're gonna drive it. We're gonna enjoy it. But the goal above everything else with this build is to make it nostalgic, make it exciting, make it fun to drive. It just needs to make the right noises and give you the right type of feels when you drive it. A lot of my cars I build, I build with a purpose in mind. They have to do something, they have to be good at something, and that comes first and foremost. Whereas this car, all it has to be good at is putting a smile on my face and other people's faces. I wanna have to get in there with a screwdriver and tweak the idle settings on the carburetors when I start it up on a cold day. That is what I want out of this car, as silly as that may sound. So, that being said, it's time to get into it. These parts are not gonna install themselves, so it's time to start tearing this thing apart. Try to get it put back together and better than ever. So that being said, let's dig in. So one of the beauties of going with the carb setup is we don't need most of the stuff that's in here. We don't have to really worry about retaining it or figuring out where it goes and making sure it's all labeled. We just really need to get it out of our hair and get it out of our way. Some of these 80s connectors with the metal clips are some of the most annoying connectors to deal with. They're such a pain, but luckily we don't really need to put them back, ideally, but I also don't like to count my chickens before they hatch, so we're trying to keep everything in good shape. This stuff is old. It is not easy to find anymore. I want to make sure if I ever do need this harness or parts of it or any of these pieces that I kept them in good shape and I'm not kicking myself down the road for tearing them up when I took them out because I thought, oh, I'll never need that ever again. So we're just plugging away at pulling this intake off. These 80s 4-cylinders, these intakes always have so much stuff going on. They've got coolant hoses and actuators, and this has the T-Viz system, so it was a little bit of a challenge to take it off. It's always a little bit difficult to get to all the bolts, but this one wasn't too bad in the grand scheme of things. So with that out of the way, we work on getting the harness tucked out of the way, the coil off since we don't need that, and it's looking pretty empty in here. All right, we got this thing semi-stripped down. Got the intake manifold off of it. You can see it is very, very dirty. 30 plus years of grease and grime. It really needs a big clean. Really need to pull the engine out, reseal it, paint the bay, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole yet. I would like to get it running with all the new stuff first, sort that stuff out, and then we can dive into making it pretty and tucking the brake lines and stuff. But step one is get it mechanically sorted. So we got that off. We also got the alternator off. We got to get it rebuilt. It randomly developed an internal short and just tried to short the battery out. And when you unplug it, it's fine. So this little tiny guy's got to get rebuilt, but you can see how dirty it is. So we've got all that pulled off. Now it's time to unpackage the new parts and see if everything's going to fit before we go any deeper. One thing you'll learn when it comes to building cars and working on cars is that nothing is ever truly bolt-on, and this carb kit is no exception. The flange isn't made quite right, the bolt spacing isn't perfect, so we had to pull the studs out and see which of the bolts were lined up and which ones would go in, because we're gonna have to modify this a little bit to get all of our bolt holes to line up. So we wanna see which ones work first, get as many of them in as we can, so we have to modify the fewest holes. We also obviously want to make sure that it's going to fit with everything we've got going on. So we've checked it, we figured out which bolts are going to work, which ones aren't, and which ones need to be moved. It's time now to put a little work in with the carbide burr and get these shifted over. So with a little bit of massaging and elbow grease, we've managed to get all of the bolts in on the flange and get it fully bolted up. So now we can turn our attention to the carburetors themselves. So we're not going to be running these with open stacks. We're going to be running these with an air filter setup. Partially because of function. Obviously, it's good to have an air filter on a car like this that could suck up a bunch of debris, but also I just think this combination specifically looks better with the big filter than it does with the open plastic stacks. It's just not the most aesthetically pleasing thing, and the filter I think makes it look a little more sporty and a little more suiting for the vintage kind of race car style we're going for here. All right, test fit complete. Bike carb setup is on, it fits, it clears. Our heater hose, heater control valve, which is sweet. I definitely want to keep heating this thing because it is a street car. A little tinkering, a little grinding, a little massaging, and they're on, they fit, and they look sweet. I was really set on the Webers for this car, but The bike carb setup grew on me as an alternative because bike carbs like this were the move back in the day, you know, when things were simpler and fuel injection wasn't as prevalent as it is today. But yeah, it looks sweet. I've always wanted something with ITBs on it. It's been a goal of mine car-wise forever, and this was kind of the perfect car to do something like this with. It's gonna look so sweet once we have it finished up, man. I'm envisioning it now. I wanna build a really cool high-rise header for it. We're gonna strip the bay, paint it, take out all this excess junk. It's gonna look like the engine can't even run. That's the goal. But first we gotta get it running, make sure it works, work out the bugs, and then go do the cleanup. As opposed to just going down the rabbit hole and stripping it all apart now and then it snowballs, and next thing you know, it's not done for 6 months or a year. We want to get this thing done in a couple of weeks, ideally a month, maybe. We'll see. It depends on parts delays. That being said, now that we're done with that, we know it's going to fit. I want to move on to the cams, the valve seals, valve springs, all that stuff. That's the next big step in getting this thing back up and running. With the fun part of putting the exciting and shiny new parts on and seeing how that looks out of the way, it's time to get into the real work of fixing the actual mechanical problems that we've got going on with this thing. It's oil consumption issues. So we pull the valve covers off, pull the timing tensioner so we can pull the timing belt off so we can get the cam gears out of the way, get the cam backing plate out of the way, and we can pull the cams out. Now, this is one of the simplest dual overhead cam 4-cylinders I've ever had the pleasure of working on. It does not get much simpler in an engine than this. So fortunately, as much as this is the boring legwork, this was a pretty easy process compared to some of the other engines I worked on. So it's time to unbox the new cams. Again, I've had these parts for a while. Some of these parts I've had for a year and I've never even got to look at them. So this is my first time getting all of this stuff out of the boxes and seeing what it all looks like together. And now we've got just about everything we need to build out this head. Now, naturally, you would pull the head off the engine, but we don't want to go down that road. We don't want to get too deep into this. We want to make it simple and quick. So we're going to be doing these valve springs on the engine. Now, the challenge is when you take the valve springs and the retainers off, there's nothing to hold the valve up, and there's a couple of ways you can rectify this. The way we like to do it is you force air into the cylinder, and that air forces the valves up and holds them in place while you swap the valve springs and the retainers over. All right, well, spring, seat, and seal number 1 changed. Pretty easy process overall, just a little bit of a debacle with the tool situation. Basically, the tool I got for this thing forever ago was a little bit too big to fit down in the pocket with the spring. So they make a smaller one, but I didn't want to wait around for days to get the smaller one, so I just made my own. Basically, I took a socket, put a neodymium magnet in it, put some tape to give us a little pocket, and it works the same way. As we push down on the spring seat, the stock one, pops the keepers loose, the magnet sucks them into here, take the spring off, and then to put the new spring on, we have another socket with this little piece that slides in here. So as we push down on the spring seat, this piece follows the keepers in, push it down far enough, they clip in, boom, we're good to go, spring is installed, Bob's your uncle. So definitely one thing I've learned with cars, there's always a solution if you look hard enough. So we've now got a tool set to do the rest of the job. We should be good to go to get this thing put back together. I don't like leaving things taken halfway apart for very long. So that being said, on the topic of street cars, since that's what this is gonna be, I actually just got my K-Swap Zafiro build registered again. I am really excited about this because this car's been down for a year. I put together a built bottom end for it, rods, pistons, we've got new bearings, new rings. We need to drive this thing around on the street some, break the engine in before we can take it back to the track, but I haven't been able to because I haven't really had time and the car wasn't registered. But now that it's back on the road, we can finally take it for a real drive and see what it feels like with all the new stuff. I mean, it is a very different setup than before. We got a T56 transmission, a built motor, and a lot of other changes that we made after we blew it up and had to fix it anyway, and I haven't really got a chance to see what it feels like other than first and second gear up and down the road. So before I get elbows deep back in this thing, this street car project, let's take this one for a little drive and just see where we're at with it so we know. well, this thing drove pretty well, all things considered. No real issues. I think one fan's not working. I'll have to tinker with that. Need to do an alignment, but it drives. Goes through the gears, runs pretty smooth. It was already trying to make boost, just barely on the throttle, so I think we're in good shape. Drive it around a little more, drain the oil, and then I think we're ready to take this thing to the track, so I'm excited. With that being said, it's time to get back to work on this thing. I am so excited to drive this thing. I think it's gonna be an absolute blast. But before we get into that, I just thought of something. I was taking my sweater off because this is a very oily project and I didn't want to get it dirty, and I remembered, I haven't told you guys, that we have new merch. We've actually had it for a bit now. It's on the site, it's in stock, it's ready to go, but I'm just getting around to mentioning it. So we came out with new hoodies and new shirts. These are embroidered black on black to match the vet, Garage Built Co, GBCO. Super simple and clean design, really, really nice quality sweaters and shirts. I tried to get the nicest ones I could find. I like clothes that are nice and comfy and durable, and that's what I end up wearing all the time. So I wanted to make sure that ours were the nicest and comfiest that I could come up with. And I gotta say, I am so happy with how these turned out. I absolutely love them. So if you're interested in checking them out, or any of the other merch we have, because we did end up restocking a bunch of other stuff as well, go to garagebuildco.com. I'll put a link down in the description. I forget to mention it a lot because I don't want to try to sell you on it, but then again, you might not know it exists if I don't tell you about it, so here's me telling you about it. All right. That being said, let's get back to work. Start swapping out the other 15 of these valve springs and seals. Doing valve springs on this engine is a really pretty simple and easy process, but it is the definition of a tedious and repetitive process. Now, we didn't have the right tools. I switched to using the installer with the remover that we got originally that didn't work, which again, wasn't really the right size either, but it was better than the socket method, but it still wasn't foolproof. It did not work 100% of the time. It worked maybe 25% of the time. So that made this a bit more of a struggle than it really needed to be, but we persevered. We kept chugging away, kept plugging away at it. This is definitely a type of project where it's easy to get kind of lost and skip steps because it is so simple at its core, and when you're doing so many of them, you just get into this rhythm and you're moving and grooving and you stop kind of thinking about what you're doing, and sometimes you might do it right, but then you'll look back and almost you blinked out. Did I check that? Did I make sure this was the right way? So it's really important to stay focused, and even if you think I've got this, I know exactly what I'm doing, to double check yourself often if you can, because otherwise you'll make a mistake and it can cost you a lot of time at best. All right, we've got 12 out of 16 done. We've got the last cylinder to do. Probably going to be the most challenging because it's tight back there, but so far so good. Now, again, the reason we came in here in the first place was to change the valve seals, hoping that that was why the engine smoked so bad and why oil got on the plugs, because it had great compression. So whenever you think you know what a problem is, you know, why something's doing something, you always hope when you go to change it that you find something obvious, like, oh, see, that's why. And we found some things. One, you can see the head is very clean and it has ARPs. So someone's been in here at some point. Now, as we're taking this apart, we noticed some things that were done wrong. So the valve seals are side specific. There's intake ones and there's exhaust ones. And on this engine, the ones we've taken out are mismatched. There's some of the intake ones are on the exhaust side and some of the exhaust ones are on the intake side. So someone was in there, did that wrong. Not to mention the springs. So these springs are directional. So as you can see where the coil line gets tighter, that's supposed to be the bottom against the head, and this is supposed to be the top. Whereas the springs we've taken out, we've been checking them as we've taken them out, and it's the same as the valve seals, they're flip-flopped. Some of them are tight up top, some of them are tight at the bottom, and these two were right next to each other, and these are exactly how we pulled them out. So someone went in and rebuilt this head, or at least did valve seals, and did some things wrong. So hopefully doing things right, it won't smoke anymore. That would be ideal. I'm not gonna get my hopes up. It's never that simple, but it's a little thing. So jibber jabber, point is, 4 more to go. Hopefully we can finish this out and move on to the next step. So fortunately, by this point, we had gotten pretty proficient at this. We had made our homemade tools work and our not quite the right size tools work, and we had gotten in a good rhythm and routine with it. But we did have a bit of struggle still. We were using the leak down tester to add air in, so we're not forcing it all in at the same time. We can ramp it in slowly, but it decided to break about halfway through the process, so we had to start adjusting the regulator on the compressor, which made things a little more challenging, but nothing we couldn't push past and get through. And with that, we have all of our valve springs done. We've got our tie retainers, we've got new valve seals, Hopefully this fixes our issues. So now we can finally put the cams in. So we got our new cams here. I went and picked up some new cam seals since these ones had RTV all over them. We got our adjustable cam gears. We got some Honda Bond. Using Honda Bond on a Toyota Honda Bond is the best, in my opinion. I've tried every type of RTV. Honda Bond is the bee's knees. We got some new plugs. So we're ready to go. We got everything we need to put the top into this engine back together. Before we start, let me show you a little comparison of the cams here. So you can see the cam on the left is the aftermarket cam. The cam on the right is the stock cam. You can see how much taller the lobes are. That's our extra lift. But then you can also see the duration difference. So see how the aftermarket cam has a much wider, more rounded lobe, and the stock cam has a much pointier lobe. That's where you're getting that extra duration from. It's the width of the lobe up here. So these should be a bit more aggressive, should hopefully give us a little chop. I'm excited, man. This thing's gonna be so cool. I know I've said that a million times, but I've been looking forward to this project for a long time, and I'm hoping we can keep things flowing and everything comes together quick. So that being said, done a whole lot of jibber jabbering so far. I need to get back to it. Let's get these cams tossed in. So I'm a big fan of assembly lube. Some people swear against it. If you're gonna run the engine soon like we are, it's not super necessary, but you never know what's gonna happen. I like to have a good layer of film on there just in case I ever need it down the road. So we get everything lubed up with some assembly lube. We get the cams put in roughly in time at top dead center where they were when we took the old ones out, and then start working the cam caps down. Now it's important to work these down in sequence. You don't want to just tighten one down and put all the pressure on one spot of the cam. You want to work all the way back to front and make sure you work them down evenly. So I used the stock cam gears to get everything lined up just to make sure everything was where it was when I took it apart, since the crank is still in the same spot. And now we're ready to install our new adjustable cam gears. Now before we do that, we need to put our new cam seals in. These weren't 100% in need of replacement, but they had a bunch of RTV on them, so I wanted to make sure we got them replaced while we're there. So with those on, before we put the cam gears on, we've got to put our backing plate on. Now, it's a little crustier than I remembered, so I decided to throw some quick spray paint on it. I am terrible when it comes to spray painting things because I always realize I want to do it right before I need to put it back on, and I don't want to wait around for it to dry, so I do kind of a quick and dirty spray paint job. Never comes out that great, but I guess it's better than it being old and crusty and rusty. So we got that on, we got the cam gears on. Now we just need to get this thing in time, get the timing belt tensioned, and check it over and make sure everything's good. I like to do a few rotations and double check each one that it's still in time. It's super important. If it goes out of time after a rotation, then you know something's wrong. If it's still in time, you got a shot it's right. All right, cams are installed, cam caps torqued to spec. We're all good to go there. Everything seems happy. Cam gear is on and timing is set. Double checked and verified. We still need to degree the cams at some point, but I'm waiting until I get the aftermarket crank damper, because that'll make that easier. For now, we're just gonna get it running with 0 advance on either cam, see how things go, and we'll take it from there. So with that, the top end is pretty much complete. The rotating assembly is complete and back together, so we can put the valve covers back on. But we're gonna be putting this one back on, but not this one. Let me show you. We're gonna be using this one and this one. This is a really, really old school trick, mod, whatever you'd wanna call it, where you use 2 oil cap valve covers. Now the reasoning for this isn't because you need 2 oil ports to fill your engine with oil. The reason is the oil side, the oil fill cap side, has a breather port for crankcase pressure relief. It's baffled, everything. So if you take another oil filter cap valve cover, now you've got 2 baffle breather ports. Now you might say, well, why wouldn't you just drill a hole in this and then you've got 2 breathers? Well, this side doesn't have the baffling like this side does. Baffling is crucial to keep yourself from just splashing oil out of your ventilation. If you have just a hole that you drill in here, it's just gonna sling oil out and you'll fill your catch can up instantly. So it's much better to have the factory baffle that's there and designed to allow just vapor to come out, not oil itself, and have that whole system on both valve covers. So now we'll have 2 little tiny 3/8 ports instead of just 1. So yeah, we've got also a new valve cover gasket set with the grommets. Ours are pretty torqued, pretty tweaked, pretty destroyed. So we're gonna replace these, get these swapped on. We're not gonna do anything with them just yet, aesthetically. I'm leaning towards polishing them, but again, this stage of the process is all about getting the car up and running and driving, make sure all the puzzle pieces fit together, get everything working together, enjoy the car a little bit, see how it feels, what it does before going down the rabbit hole and trying to make everything super pretty, because we don't really know what all is going to work together, what we're going to need to change, what we're going to want to change. So this is, again, the proof of concept phase. Let's get it running, let's get it working, let's drive it, and then let's make it all look super nice and pretty. So yeah, jibber jabber, let's get these valve cover gaskets swapped and get these on the engine so we can seal this thing up. So unfortunately, only one of these valve covers actually had the barb, and it's not going to be an easy piece to find and replace, so I decided to just tap them both to 8 MPT. Fortunately, we didn't even have to drill it up a size or anything, just literally run the tap through it, and now we've got 8 MPT ports. We're not going to use these brass fittings. We're going to use something similar, but these are just kind of placeholders to make sure it works. So with the ports tapped, put the new valve cover gaskets on, and then we can get these installed back on the engine. Now, unfortunately, the valve cover gasket set was old. It came with the car, and one of them was torn up just from sitting there and basically melting against another one. So we had to reuse one of the old ones. We'll replace that in time. Again, this is the proof of concept phase. So with the valve covers back on, I wanted to get the full effect by tossing the carbs back on and seeing what it looks like as one complete unit. All right, check it out. Most of the way put back together, semi-complete, even with the mismatched valve covers and everything. I just see the potential for what this thing's gonna be like finished up, and it gets me so excited. Such a cool looking combination, super simple, super basic. That's the goal. Now, we could start this thing if we had left the stock intake on, but with the carburetors, we need to change the fuel system. The stock fuel system is meant for fuel injection, which is 40 to 50 PSI, whereas the carbs need about 3 PSI. So we've got to change the fuel system. We've got most of the stuff for that. We also are going to be doing a standalone ignition system, an MSD box, so that way we can eliminate the stock ECU entirely and make this thing super basic, super simple, super mechanical. All we'll have is an ignition box. That's the only electronics we'll have, and then the carbs. But we may be ditching the bike carbs. Chelsea was looking on Marketplace, and he may have found exactly what I wanted to put on this car originally that I couldn't get when I started acquiring the parts for it. And I'm hoping to go pick it up tomorrow. It's local in Florida. I'm gonna be very, very excited if this pans out, because then I'm gonna be even more excited to get this car running and driving than I am now. So that being said, hopefully we can pick that up, keep on trucking along, but there's not a whole ton left to do for stage one of just getting this thing running and driving, assuming we don't run into any hurdles or any major parts delays. I mean, one little part can stop you from driving something. So hopefully we skate through smooth, but we'll see. So that being said, for now, we are out of time. So I'm gonna go ahead and end it here, but I do wanna say thank you for watching, thanks for subscribing, and then I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.